you've got a wealth of experience in ADHD. Not only that, but a wealth of experience in mysticism, spirituality, a wealth of experience in neurodivergence and parenting and transitions and starting over. So what do you think a young man who desperately wants to fail and succeed in these areas, what would be a good question to ask you?
How have you not gone crazy in treating a singular diagnosis for 35 years with the degree of difficulty that ADHD presents?
How have you not gone crazy?
I don't know. I really don't, because I feel like I have gone crazy several times in that. This is why it's so fascinating to be on this podcast about failing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I say now, how did I learn how to treat ADHD? I failed more times than I could count.
Oh, yeah, imagine.
And I clinically failed in horrible ways. I had 2 long-term adult group therapy ADHD groups. Both of them were going on for 5 years.
Oh, my goodness.
This one was in the 90s. The next one was about 2000 to 2004 or 5. And they were ending in abject failure of emotional and mental stress that we couldn't figure out. Everyone kept suffering. We could create systems. You could start to get ahead of things, and suddenly the rug would get pulled out from under them again and again and again. And so I had these horrible, I would end these groups after 5 years, and I'm like, this is as much as I know.
Yeah.
We just couldn't sit in the pain any longer. And these were pioneers to me. And so it was in that mid-2000s, 2004, 2005, that I began to understand the ideas of imagination and neuroscience of the mind. And I began to say, I wonder if we began to use imagination in a way that could resource these individuals, what might happen. So I began to experiment with clients in group therapies on how to use their imagination to create these internal worlds I call now emotional safe places.
Mm-hmm.
And they began to use them as a resource, as a way to live their lives in ways they hadn't before. And the interesting thing to me is that that stumbling into that, which clinically I was petrified. Here I was asking clients to do things that was not well researched or understood because we didn't know what else to do. But they started to understand themselves. They started to get better. They started to feel like they could get on with life. They stopped feeling like they were crazy. So here's what I know today, 35 years later. ADHD has a neurological underactivity in the left part of the brain. It has a chemical disruption in the hippocampus or active working memory centers.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very generalized statement, but that's what we know. So the challenge is, if you're not evaluating your life effectively, but you're evaluating it in fits and starts as you go along into life, you have a very difficult time finding your footing because you don't develop an internal sense of self, this natural ability to stop and evaluate. And Russell Barkley, who was another grandfather in the field, was one of the first ones who really said, look, the internal evaluator does not develop in people with ADHD. That's where the challenge comes from. So if it doesn't develop internally, what do you have to do, Phil? You have to go and create it yourself. So you start getting that evaluator out of your imagination. You start getting it by talking to yourself. You start doing things that look weird to other people.
Yeah.
It's better to look weird to other people and start feeling like you have a life than constantly feel like there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
So, what's that one question? How have I not gone crazy?
Yeah.
I just continue to evolve in the field.
Yeah.
I continue to treat myself as I'm treating others. I have a very authentic style to my counseling. I say that I mentor, which is where are you head in your life? How do you get there? I coach. I do a lot of directed action with people. And then I counsel along the lines of mental, emotional, spiritual health, trauma, depression, anxiety, family problems, relationship problems, you name it.
Yeah.
Okay. I am working to now teach other professionals this. How do you teach professionals to treat ADHD in this messy, chaotic way? It's not a simple process. You have to be very wide scoped when you treat someone with with ADHD.
Yeah.
And so how do I not go crazy? I love what I do.
Yeah.
Because it changes people's lives. And I've created an authenticity in my style that's really been burned out of a lot of failure and disruption.
And it seems like you're eating your own dog food too.
Yes. If you don't practice what you preach,
Yeah.
why are you preaching it?
You're a perfect example of that. You know, you're validating these practices and rituals on yourself. If they're having
Right.
success on you, then you give them to other folks to
and I
to
look
try.
at them, you know, with others. I look at them with myself. I look at what's going on out there. But the reality is we're still developing the playbook
Yeah.
on the adult ADD spectrum. We're really developing the playbook as we age. So I'm 62. And there are physiological changes happening and those kind of things that make a real challenge for people with ADD. And so how do we do that? We keep staying in front of it.
Yep.
So I just learn theory upon theory upon theory. When I look at my adult training that I talk with other therapists about, I think there's 18 or 19 theoretical orientations that I've used to put the model together.
Yeah.
Transpersonal, behavior modification, experiential, you know, you name it, humanistic theory, Adlerian. I mean, I just pulled from all these pieces because you've got to have this human approach.
Yeah.
Because if you're not having a human approach, you're coming from a strategic, organizational, prescriptive model.
When you're talking about the human-centered approach, you're talking about like Carl Rogers.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you don't bring your heart into the situation and expose it at a level that's meaningful,
Yeah.
and that's not an easy skill to gain, to be authentic as your true
You're
self.
an artist.
Yes. You're
an artist.
painting with someone's life, but it's someone's life.
Yeah.
And every one of them is unique and every one of them is precious.
Yeah.
I have 2 or 3 clients. I've treated highly disrupted cases for years. And to me, I can only treat 2 or 3 in my practice at any one given time. And this is where there's comorbidities, there's anxieties, there's depressions, there's traumas, there's hormonal problems, there's
By the time they
family
get to be an
systems.
adult and discover they have ADHD, they have a lot of stuff that through having ADHD untreated
Yep.
has now a lot of these other things have popped up as a result of their survival of that,
Right.
unaware.
right. And so,
Comorbidities, coexisting conditions,
Yes.
depression, anxiety,
yes.
all of these different things.
But if you look at the resilience and the tenacity of people with ADHD, so much of that comes from the survival instinct of, I had to do it. I didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
And so there's this stick-to-itiveness. There's this pulling themselves up by their bootstraps.
Yeah.
Now, the challenge with that is by the time you're in your mid-30s, you have such an adrenal fatigue. You're exhausted
Yeah.
from pulling yourself by your bootstraps, and there's no more damn boots left.
Well, the funny thing there is that saying, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, is to attempt to do that which cannot be done. You can't physically pull yourself up by your bootstrap. You can't do it. It's impossible.
Yes, and if you look at that phrase, that's exactly what it means. It's impossibility.
It's an impossible thing to do.
Because you have to do what? You have to find good help. You have to reach for help consistently.
Yeah.
And for
You have
someone,
to know that you need help.
right. And if you have failed over and over and over again,
Yeah.
there's a term I use, Phil, called intervention fatigue,
Oh.
where people with ADHD have reached for help time and time and time and time again,
Yeah.
and it hasn't met the mark.
Yeah.
It hasn't been enough.
Yeah.
And they feel like a failure again.
Man, I this all hits the mark for me, having, over and over gone to, whether it's nonviolent communication, whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, neurolinguistic programming, radical honesty,
Yes.
EMDR. You know,
Right.
it's all of these things searching for that silver bullet that's going to make me normal. That's going to
Yes.
make me interact with the world in a way that
Right.
I see other people do in
Right.
movies and in
Right.
TV.
Right.
You know,
And the reality
in
is,
classrooms. I'll never will.
you never will.
I never will. So it's
And
that
so-
acceptance and learning. I
and
mean,
so-
not that any of these things are bad or wrong. All of
No.
these practices are extremely enriching
Right, and helpful.
and helpful, but none of them are a silver bullet
No.
until you get that, oh, I'm different and I'm never going to be, none
Right.
of these are going to transform me into a neuroatypical person.
No, because what is neuroatypical? Okay, when I studied neurodevelopmental theory along the lines of learning, right, in the 90s, everyone has a hair color, height, and weight on their learning process.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if we could get that everyone's hair colors are a little different and their eye colors are a little different,
Yeah.
and we just accepted that, you know, and I've got a brilliant, one of my projects, you know, that lies in waiting is a neurodevelopmental program to teach children in elementary school how their brains develop along the lines of learning. If we did that in 4th and 5th grade, it's a change maker that changes their life. It's like, oh, I don't organize things well. I'm going to have help with that,
Yeah.
you know,
Oh.
but I'm a super artist.
It's like, how do we teach kids to look in their toolkit, their biological toolkit, and say, what do I got?
Right.
Where are my high levels? Where are my low levels?
Right.
Do I even got a screwdriver in here?
Right.
What is going on?
Right.
And then normalizing that kids are going to have different tools. They're not always going to have the
Yes.
same tools.
And sometimes you're going to have to invent your own tools
yes.
because there's not going to be a tool out there that works for you.
Yeah.
And so when you look at, you were asking me how I thrive, so much of how I thrive is that personalizing strategies. You create things that work for you,
Yeah.
not for other people.
Right.
I think there's a real issue in my field right now because there is so much information on ADHD out there and so much for services. So follow this. This is a developmental issue in the mind that has challenges with evaluating, planning, and prioritizing. I've got all this information out there. Guess what?
Oh my
it's
God.
hard to figure out where to go.
Yes.
So with
Yes.
that, you have to understand. You've got to personalize. It's not like that information's not good out there. It is. But you have to, what works for me, which is why when I look at treating adults with ADHD, I'm going after resourcing first.
Yeah.
You got to know how to feel your body. You got to know how to slow down and be mindful.
Mm-hmm.
You got to know how to breathe. You got to know how to reset and reorient yourself.